Oh my God, guys, here we are. It's another amazingly exciting episode. No, I can't do it.
Hey, you were like a YouTuber then. That was so exciting.
Yeah, you sounded young and interesting, Tom.
I know, but it is just another episode. It's just another... Well, actually, I was going to say it's another episode of us waffling on, but it's not, is it? 'Cause we've got a fantastic guest. So actually...
it is exciting.
Let's use some of that previous excitement. Yeah. Kate Fox joins us for a chat.
But who's she, Tom?
She is a stand-up poet stroke comedian stroke does lots of stuff on BBC radio and, as we find out, kind of all weird and wonderful things that you never thought might have even existed. Yeah.
We get to find out what it means to be a resident poet.
It doesn't mean that you have to live in that building either, which is what I thought it meant.
No, you can still... You can commute, I think, can't you, as a resident poet? But yeah, that's interesting. And we find out... Are you ready, listeners, to find out which of the country's top comedians only became a comedian because of Kate Fox? Yeah.
That's a good tease forward, that is.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
She's trying to get people to listen so they won't know it's Sarah Millican, but when they listen, that'll be like, oh, right, yeah, that was the tease. I'm liking that. That's going to work well.
Stay
tuned
folks.
to find out. Yes. Yeah. And we hear a few of her poems as well, kind of live.
Including her first ever poem that she ever wrote.
Yes, which was actually really annoyingly good.
I know, wasn't it? Yeah.
And you kind of think, all right, yeah, that's why you're doing what you do. Good stuff.
Yeah. So, yeah, enjoy.
Enjoy. Have a listen to Kate, and that's the rubbish intro, isn't it? Yeah. I don't know where I was going with that. You said enjoy. Should have just left it at that, Dave. I tried to add something on.
There's nothing else to say after enjoy, is there?
Do you know what I'm going to do? We'll just leave a little beat, and I'm just going to say the word enjoy again, and then we'll fade into it. Enjoy! Yeah, I think that worked. So, Kate Fox, that's just your name. You're not actually a fox, are you?
No, not actually.
It's difficult to tell. Right, good. Thank you very much for coming on to the Failing Writers podcast. We always have to apologise for people saying it's the Failing Writers podcast because we're the failing writers and we like to learn from other people that aren't.
Yeah.
Because,
balance, isn't it? It's all balance.
But don't all writers feel like they're failing anyway? All writers surely feel like that. Probably even J.K. Rowling, if she came on, she'd be like, to be honest, I'm not doing that well.
Well, the great thing is, even people like J.K. Rowling have had failure, well publicised failures of sending it to so many publishers and getting rejected. Yep. So everyone's, you can't do anything without failing. If you're not failing, you're not doing the job properly, are you? You're not reaching high enough.
But I think that's right. You're always reaching for something else as well, aren't you? You're never quite in the camp you want to be in.
Very true. And I think the other thing is the imposter syndrome thing, isn't it? Of getting that big and being that, being so sort of famed and worshipped, and then you think, oh, I'm just writing words here. This is ridiculous.
You think there's the odd sort of writer, maybe so I'm going to name some writers, but apologies to these writers if this is sort of libelous. But there is some very confident, best-selling, usually, always male novelists who are like, actually, I'm the greatest American novelists, usually Americans. So Philip Roth, John Updike, I'm fairly sure they don't suffer imposter syndrome. And Salman Rushdie probably doesn't suffer imposter syndrome. They're like, no, I am pretty brilliant. But basically every writer I think that I know, even the ones who have been making a living from it in some fashion or other for years and years, often have at some quite deep-rooted level a sense of, as you say, either imposter syndrome or, I should be doing better, or what the heck is the point of words on a page anyway?
Which is fantastic good to know, because it gives us such a large pool of people to interview.
So where do you fall?
It gives us loads of options.
Where do you fall in that, Kate? Do you feel like you're just absolutely nailing this? Or
no, but I suppose, and we're asking at a funny time, because a lot of my work is as a performer as well as a writer. So I did have the satisfaction, at least, of, if it went well anyway, seeing an audience in front of me react to my words. in some way. And luckily, usually not by throwing bottles or tomatoes. So I could at least go, oh, look, the thing that I think I'm doing, I'm wanting to make people react, I can see that I'm doing it. But then for the last 15 months, I have not been performing. The performance world hasn't really existed. I haven't done many Zoom performances. And I have actually come out of that with this strong sense of beginning again, feeling like an absolute novice at performance and having no sense of how my written words are received. So yeah, this is definitely a very strange place for me currently.
So you're craving that applause, that immediate sort of. You could do it like as you're writing something, just somebody somewhere just clapping every time you finish a sentence, just to reassure you.
Exactly. I should have an app.
Yeah, you need an audience soundboard, don't you, on your phone?
I do. Well done, Kate. You've written a sentence. No, I think it's probably partly at the beginning. It probably was a straight craving the applause and the validation of my existence, and also the adrenaline of standing in front of an audience. But actually, as time's gone on, and the adrenaline addiction has worn off, it turns out what I used to like an audience for was to be able to test out my writing, to be able to see where the energy in it was, to see what people responded to. And now I have had to, as actually most writers who don't perform have always had to do, but I've had to learn this. I've just had to rely on my own inner sense of what is working. So that's probably a good thing ultimately, but it still feels very new and a bit uncertain, actually.
And do you find that you're quite good at predicting that?
Well,
on the whole,
think that you would get better at predicting it, wouldn't you, over time? But I'm not. I am still often surprised by the things that an audience will pick out, and actually, so that still applies to a degree. So a book of my poems was published in February. It was originally meant to have been published in November. And usually I would have done lots of readings and lots of performances around the poems in that book. So, and then I did a few Zoom ones, but then mainly what happened was people would email or message and say, oh, I was reading it and such a poem really struck me. And it was never the poems that I thought were the standout poems or the ones.
You were those. That was just a filler. That one was rubbish. I just had to keep them. I just had to get the word count up.
All right. I've literally never thought about that poem since, and now you're telling me that it's, so that I wonder if maybe some people get better and better at predicting what an audience is going to like. I suppose if you write into a formula, you have to be able to predict whether that formula works and how it's going to land, but quite often I aren't. So, and maybe on also at the moment, I think what people are responding to, of course, has kind of changed because of the weird times.
Yeah, you might be right there. That's the beauty of subjectivity in a way, isn't it?
I think as well, you've got to go full circle sometimes, haven't you? And actually get to the point where you're not writing for the audience anyway. You get that amount of kind of confidence that it's like, well, enough people will like it because this is good. And you kind of take it away from trying to predict what other people are going to think.
Exactly. And generally, I think a lot of the writers and the poets and the performers and the comedians, actually, that I most admire are the ones who have always had a strong sense of, sod it. I'm just going to do what I'm going to do. If the audience follow me, great. If they don't, tough shit. And I've had to really work to come to that place, and I'm still not really at that place, but much more so. But then the thing for me is I work to commission a lot, because I've always, I'm a regular on Radio 3 spoken word show that Ian McMillan hosts, The Verb. Every 6 weeks they'll ask me to write something. However, that is a brilliant show for me to be working on, because I don't think they're so eclectic and they're so open, and they just cross all genres of word. And it's kind of given me permission to. So one week I might write a poem for them. Another week it might be a comedy sketch. They generally want me in to do lighter things and kind of cheer the show up if they've got some existential philosophers on, and someone who does classical music on Radio 3. Then I'm the clown in the mix. But still, I can get to do more what I want to do, and that's been really good for me, actually.
I love the idea of them sat in a production meeting going, right, we've got all this stuff. Wow, this is a really boring episode we got here, isn't it? What? Right, phone Kate.
Exactly. Well, it almost literally, because they did one on time the other week, And I ended up writing an imagined book club session where deep sea woodlice and horseflies had to read a book. And because they experienced time completely differently, they were reading the books very differently. And that it's almost, it was emergency, slightly amusing poet voice needed here type thing.
I imagine they went, do you know what, Kate? We haven't got that feature in the show so far, so bizarrely.
Exactly. We need more deep sea woodlice in our lives, don't we all?
Yeah.
So Kate, what makes up the main bit of what you do then? What do you call yourself, if you like? What's your job title?
My job title, generally I will say stand-up poet. To reflect the fact that I perform as much as write. But then, I mean, if you look at the last year, actually what I've done is I've written a non-fiction book for a publisher. I've half written a play for a festival. I've written this book of poems that are not really performance poems, and presented a pick of the week for Radio 4. So it turns out I do more than I thought I did, and maybe I'm a bit stubborn to keep saying that I'm a stand-up poet. I could just say I'm a writer and a performer or something. But
but that's kind of at your core, if you like. Then that's
definitely.
That's where you would retreat to if everything else
definitely
stopped. And what's the difference between a poem that's a performance poem and a poem that just goes in a book?
I think for me, definitely, a performance poem tends to be funnier, tends to have rhyme, tends to have rhythm, tends to be instantly memorable, and is a bit more surfacey. And a poem that goes in a book, for me, usually is shorter, doesn't rhyme, not as memorable.
So just slightly worse.
When I put it like that, just worse. Exactly.
It's not as much fun. Less fun poetry.
Exactly.
Right, good. I think I could write poems for books.
Yeah. So poems that you don't want to read, you put them in a book for other people to read.
Exactly. Perfectly summarised.
I think there is a difference, though, isn't there? That you kind of, with the performance thing, you're performing it once. You're not going to run over it again and point out some bits that were quite funny, or did you remember this bit? Whereas obviously in a book, you're there able to reread the poem, aren't you, to find a different depth or see what that bit is, or, oh, that's referencing back to the start. Let's read the first verse again or whatever. I guess there's...
Yeah, and actually the reason I'm a bit ambivalent about that is, as a reader, I read so quickly, and I don't remember half of what I read. I just gulp it down. I'm a kind of gobbling reader.
You're a greedy reader.
That sounds wrong.
Yeah.
Yes. A greedy reader. That sounds better.
I think I read like that because I don't particularly enjoy reading. So it's kind of like, well, how fast can I read to get to the end of this?
Yeah.
That's
really. Oh.
It's just in one eye and out the other.
Nice.
That might be the title of this. I might use that as a title for this episode. That's
totally
lovely.
Title.
Yeah.
Is,
Kate's writing that down. That's now the title of a
Exactly.
poem. That's a performance poem.
That
Title
is.
of the podcast. Good line, Dave. Well done. Get it on a t-shirt.
My work is done.
And we thought you peaked when you came up with your catchphrase the other week.
I know, but they just keep coming.
Well, what was the catchphrase?
How did you like it?
So Dave's catchphrase. How did you like it? Well, how do I put this? We all love a catchphrase. A good old-fashioned catchphrase. A funny little calling card that everyone holds dear. A few little words we all want to hear. Who couldn't love Bart Simpson's Eat My Shots, Man? Or the Chuckle Brothers, To Me, To You? We are a fan. And if you're old enough, you'll know Steptoe was indeed a dirty old man. Mr. Humphreys from Are You Being Served was always free. And you'd always get a nice to see you nice from old Brucey. But when they heard Dave's catchphrase, I'm afraid the feedback was not all that. Victor Meldrew doesn't believe it. Baldrick has no cunning plan. And Arnie most certainly won't be back. Such wonderful phrases. You'd say, I never tired of hearing that. So what a shame Dave chose. How do you like it? Because, well, it's just a little bit crap.
But you've got to say it like that as well.
You've got to say it like a high-pitched 1940s.
Yeah. Yeah. Like Mr. Punch. Yeah.
Still tickles me for some reason. So, Kate, I was going to ask you, what is that book called that was published back in February?
It's called The Oscillations.
Ooh, nice. And I feel like I might need you to read your favourite out of it. Do you have it handy?
I do have it handy because I realised from some of your other podcasts that you had people read actual words and stuff, and I was like, to read my favourite.
Yeah, what's your favourite?
Hold on a minute. No, this is the Failing Writers podcast. Read the one in there that really shouldn't have got in but made the cut because you had to make up the numbers.
Exactly. I wish to do that. Hang on. Which one do I think shouldn't have got in? Well, do you know, I have to say, actually, this book, so normally, honestly, people aren't that bothered about performance poems in a book. They just get put in. No one edits them. It's just like, oh, there's your poems. But for this one, I had a brilliant editor. She's called Jane Cumming. She's the woman who runs Nine Arches Press, which is this indie poetry publisher that's become a pretty big indie poetry publisher. And she sort of knows what she's doing. And she properly edited every comma, every full stop would be kind of like, ooh, should this "the" be there? And although it was not a level of editing I would normally pay to my work, it just felt like the amount of love and care and attention that someone had actually given it. So I have to say, to be honest, thanks to Jane, anything that shouldn't be in it has been winnowed out. But I'm going to read a poem called Sea Swimmers because I've just been swimming in lakes all around Windermere and Ullswater, and swimming's a thing. So what you're sadly not getting is a much funnier poem that's in my other book that's not to hand, that's called Two Women Swimming Breaststroke in the Pool, and it's about how there's always two women talking and doing breaststroke in every single pool you ever go in. And I will just tell you the last line of that poem that you're not going to hear. So out of context, and as I'm behind the two women in the pool, I sometimes wish they'd fucking drown. And people enjoy the subtle twist there. It sounded like it was going to be such a lovely affirmation of two women joyously swimming together, perhaps a feminist appreciation of the beauty of sisterhood.
I mean, we're big on analysing poetry on this podcast, and I mean, it's interesting for me. I'm feeling like there's a bit of a subtext in that about wanting them to drown.
Yeah, definitely something going on.
Is that right?
You've picked up.
Yeah, as if you want them to drown.
Yeah. It's amazing how you've got into the subtlety.
It works on many levels.
It does.
The shallow end and the deep end. No, it does. It really does.
Death to swimmers. Well, I suppose. See, now we've done that, and now this one, they're probably. Or does it work at many levels?
That sounds really fun. I bet all your poems are fun. Read us this other one, Kate.
No, here's a
probably won't be disappointed.
Sea swimmers. Okay. We used to go in 2s and 3s, heads bowed, black-robed like nuns on the way to matins. Everybody sees we are curing ourselves of something, but say only they could never face the cold, that we are brave and mad. We love to hear this as much as they love being allowed to say it. The sky is usually iron and pewter now, the water only a degree or two colder than August. We have to enter singly under this week's rules, layered in our obvious need, forgetting the shock of immersion again and again and again. This they needed more drowning, that one.
Well, that was beautiful.
That was very nice. I liked it.
It was good.
Yeah, dry robes in. Dry robes are very in. Dry robes have become this garment that is now
What's
a bit
a dry
charged.
robe? What is that?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's basically like wearing a sleeping bag. Essentially, it's kind of got fleecy inside, and then a kind of sleeping bag duvet covered. I don't know what that fabric's called, but you know what I mean, like a slippy fabric on the outside. It's really big. It's got a hood, and you see all this. So the swimmers go in the sea or the lake or whatever, and they take their dry robe, that's heavily branded dry robe, to the point that in some places they actually have signs up saying "No dry robes here."
And that's where they put them, right?
Yeah, because what they mean is no big gangs of swimmers all just having one coffee for ages after they've swum and dripping on the floor of the cafe is what they mean. Well, that's not in most places, just some unfriendly place.
Yeah.
It's a thing, honest.
Wow.
There's like a massive swimming subculture that we've been missing here, isn't there?
Yeah, I'm learning a lot today. I've got to
Gangs of swimmers roaming the country, causing havoc with their dry robes.
Yeah.
Forget about the stabbings and stuff in London. This is where the real problem with society lies.
Yeah.
The dry robers.
Wearing a massive sock and wishing each other ill. Sounds like a great community.
I don't know about anyone else, but with the mention of dry robes, as soon as you started explaining what they were, all I could see was it on a Dragon's Den pitch. I'd be shocked if that wasn't started life on a dragon. It just sounded like something they do, and then they'd managed to entice the least appropriate person out of the panel to get in one on the show.
You can see Duncan Bannatyne in it now. Yes, definitely.
I'm stuck in here. I can't get out.
I'm no dry at all.
For that reason, I'm out.
You're listening to the award-winning Failing Writers podcast. Potentially award-winning maybe in the future, possibly. As of the current time, this podcast unsurprisingly holds no awards whatsoever.
So, Kate, I've got a very serious question for you. What do you need curing from?
Oh, yes. What do I need curing from? Oh, the usual stuff for a writer, dysfunctional family, miserable. No, actually, my childhood was all right, actually, on the whole, apart from my family. And divorce, death. The usual things that occur by the time you're 45.
Where did you grow up, Kate? Where did you grow up?
Grew up in Bradford, in West Yorkshire. Lovely Bradford, yes. At the time of, I would love to write more, actually, because Bradford is this amazing city, this beautiful city.
It is,
the building's gorgeous. It has this amazingly interesting sort of diverse ethnicity. You've got loads of people from Bangladesh and Pakistan, and it's a whole vibrant place. But actually growing up there I was born in 1975, there is of course this kind of weird darkness there as well. Partly you've got the Yorkshire Ripper, and partly there's this other undercurrent of darkness. I've only ever heard it captured by, do you know David Peace's Red Riding trilogy?
Oh,
yeah.
On Channel 4 also was books. And he really captures that just weird sense of something buried under the carpet in the West Yorkshire. Well, Jimmy Savile, sadly not buried under the carpet, probably should have been. But that whole era is this very... that there's something, and I don't think I've ever captured by my writing particularly, although it kind of does inform what I do. I know everywhere is interesting to grow up, but I do think there's something about the West Yorkshire and the Bradford of the 80s that could be investigated even more, actually.
Well, I went to university in Bradford, so it's a beauwent place, but it
quite
is
unique.
a special sort of vibe, doesn't it? Do you still live there, or do you go back there a lot?
I went back there when my stepmom was still alive quite often. I was back there on Saturday, funnily enough, for the Literature Festival, which has become this brilliant thing that actually is huge and reflects Bradford. And I don't know if you know the poet John Hegley, comic poet, who was probably more known in the 90s. So he went to university in Bradford as well. And he was on at the same gig, and I often bump into John, and it was just so nice to see him and chat about curry. And he was also, of course, having that Bradford's curries, the best curry. You'll have had a lot of Bradford curries, won't you, Dave?
Oh, I've had many a curry in Bradford.
What's your favourite curry house? Do you have one?
My favourite curry house is it's the Cashmere near the Alhambra.
Oh yeah.
Yes. No tablecloths, no napkins, nothing soft like that.
You just walk in there and they just hurl curry at you. No plates, no forks.
Yep.
Just walk in.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, open your mouth.
Did you write poetry as a kid then? Was that your starting point? Was that
Yeah, totally. It was just a thing of making up daft rhymes in the car, I'm a little fly, and here I go, splatting through the car window. All my blood and guts pour out. I am dead without a doubt. It's not a very nice way for me to die, but I'm only a humble fly. My friends and family will wonder where I've gone. It's a good job I've got my labelled undies on. First poem ever wrote there, in with the deep subtext.
I was going to ask whether the stuff you wrote when you were a kid was rubbish or not, but that was very good. So that answers that question.
Yeah, that's quite sickening, isn't it?
It's because it's weird that I remember, but it was because I did it in the car. I was one of 3 children, and if you're one of 3 in car journeys, usually there's a constant fight as to who gets to sit in the middle or who doesn't
the awful
get to
hierarchy.
Sit. Yes, yeah, because you don't want to sit in the middle.
I always had to sit in the middle, even though I was the largest child. By the time we'd kind of grown up a little bit, but because I was the youngest,
well, that's not right, is it?
Sit in the middle.
Largest shouldn't.
That was just to avoid balance issues, though, wasn't it, Tom?
Yeah, there was. Yeah. Because that was one time when I was allowed to sit behind my dad, and we drove around in circles for about 20 minutes.
Yeah,
because he couldn't right the car.
It's an excellent picture. 2-wheelering them.
I was going to say though about sort of about poetry as a kid, because a lot kids tend to be into poetry because we like things that rhyme, and then a lot of people sort of, I don't know, sort of lose interest in it as they get older. So what is it that sort of kept you going, kept you interested in poetry sort of through the years?
I love words. I love playing with words, and it's so bizarre and good that it's been possible to make a living out of doing it. I just landed at. I know there are lots of other ways to make. You can do podcasts. You can be a radio copywriter. They're great ways too, and they're things, as you know. But I just kind of carried on doing it, and I had this compulsion as well. I wanted my words to be heard, but I felt really shy about it. And I didn't know how to make my words be heard or to share them. And so for me, performance was my way in, because I went to these open mic nights. I went to one in Bradford actually very early on and wrote a poem during the night and then performed it. Yeah. The same when I was working as a radio journalist at Rutland Radio, of all places. There was an open mic night and I wrote one during the thing. And it was always just this very shy, tentative thing that I was doing, almost like, am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to actually get up to do the cardinal sin in the eyes of my mum, which would be showing off? Oh, don't show off. And actually that gave it a bit of a frisson, because I wasn't allowed to show off, but actually there I was getting up and people were laughing. So it was like, oh, don't do this. Oh, but do this. And then when I lived in Newcastle, in order to, because I was a radio journalist, then there was actually quite a thriving scene, a poetry scene, and you could just sign up for these nights. And then quite soon, people started saying, oh, well, I'm running a festival. Can you come and do a gig for 50 quid? Or, I'm running this other night. Can you come and do some poems for 100 quid eventually? And it just sort of took off from there. And I found this whole generally Arts Council subsidised sector where you could legitimately share your poems. And I still have the voice in my head going, don't show off. Oh, don't show off. That's bad. But I have somehow overcome that because I'm showing off for money. So that's somehow allowed.
Wow. So there's like this whole little underground world that nobody knows about unless you're into poetry or you are a poet.
Exactly. And I just stumbled across it, really. And it was tied into the world of stand-up comedy. Like I was a really quite shit stand-up comedian.
Join the club.
Oh, were you also shit?
One of the worst.
Right. But there's a thing, isn't there? Connecting to failing writers. If you've done stand-up, that's still, to other people anyway, they're like, wow, that's so impressive that you ever did that at all. And it kind of is, isn't it?
Yeah, not if you'd heard Dave say it, wasn't, to be honest, Kate. Yeah, not so much.
Well, actually, me not so much either. But people sort of eventually.
God, imagine if you and Dave had been on the same bill. That would have been like people like, this is the worst gig I've ever been to. When are the comedians coming on?
A shit night all round. But it did give me. I'll tell you what, though, the shit stand-up comedian is is a good stand-up poet in the sense of if you have any of the skills at all of stand-up comedy, that's generally better than many performance poets who have never learned any of those skills and don't really believe they need to. And for me, I was like, well, I think I vaguely need to have a sense of a punchline and a vague sense of timing and connecting with an audience.
Right, so it was a good grounding in it. It kind of gave you some...
Definitely.
Right.
Yeah.
You do deliver a poem well, gotta say.
Really? That sounded like you were going to say something really sarcastic then. I do, yes, I do.
We're not always, sarcastic and glib about everything.
Sometimes there's a genuine comment that just really freaks people out.
There's silence after that.
What? You're being nice?
This is the Failing Writers Podcast, but don't let that put you off. Keep listening.
I've got a really antagonistic question.
Ooh.
Kate, why do we need poetry?
Oh, why do we need poetry? Do you know, before the pandemic, I might have said that often poetry is a middle-class luxury, and it's a way by which people sort of show off their refined cultural tastes and thus delineate themselves in the social hierarchy. But now, to be honest, I would actually say, it turns out we genuinely need, not all of us, not all the time, but sometimes, some of the time, we need the ability to say and share and think and read things in the language that's not the normal language of the everyday. We need to go beyond and underneath prose, because sometimes there are feelings and vague fears and anxieties and hopes and joys that just don't hack it in the language of the shopping list or the political speech. They need a heightened language and a charged language. And actually, without access to that, sometimes I would even say we might suffer because there might be things that we really need to express that we just can't. And poetry can leap in and fill that gap. So before, I was not really an apologist for poetry, actually. And now I've seen its use, I've seen its needs. Although at the same time, I would also then end by saying poetry, not just for pandemics, but for life. So
that is a brilliant answer,
that, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, I would totally agree with that. I mean, not just in the sense that it's a cathartic process, isn't it? Writing.
Yeah.
Especially writing poetry, I think. For the reasons that you say.
Yeah.
But
absolutely.
But actually reading it as well. Yeah. And that whole idea that that subjectivity that you were talking about before, not every poem is for every person. But sometimes you find a poem, you think, oh my God, that person is speaking specifically to me. They must have written it for me. They must have known me somehow.
And actually, and I know that we do get that with novels, but maybe in a less sort of again heightened way, because with poetry, it's words that you can they're short enough. There's few of them enough. You can take them with you in your head or carry them round with you on your phone or in your pocket, and you've kind of got them to run through, to run over. You can take them into your own body. I mean, this poetry originally was written round campfires by people who were probably, they didn't have pen and paper at that point. It was the oral tradition. They were writing to the rhythm of their heartbeats, and then maybe there were drums, and certainly around the campfire people's heartbeats started going in rhythm, as they still do at a poetry reading now. And there's just something very elemental about it, and it's very physical, it's very visceral, most poetry is not for most people. But there was a poet called Adrian Mitchell, one of the Liverpool poets in the 60s, and he said most people ignore poetry because most poetry ignores people.
Yes.
But actually, I think that's less and less true. Lots of poetry is connecting with people. And as a poetry editor said the other day, she reads poetry for a job, but there's just the odd gem that she really needs as a poem to take with her, and everything else she can kind of take it or leave it. But those gems, as you've said, once you've got those poems that connect with you, well, that's really good. And if I've ever And I know I have, actually. So this is where I am going to big myself up and say, do you know, no, job's a good one. I did part of my job. I know, definitely, at least some of my poems have connected with at least a few people in a way that one of them can be that poem for that person. That'll do me. That's all right, I reckon.
Because we, like, way back at the start of the podcast, we read a bit of our teenage poetry. And I used to write quite a lot, and I sort of fell out of it because I've always kind of found that the lack of sort of strict rules and structures is both sort of liberating and terrifying at the same time. So we've discussed when you're writing a novel or whatever, there's certain structures to character and the 3-act structure, and there's certain ways of doing things you can fall back on. But with poetry, you can kind of do whatever you want, can't you? You know, you can make a poem out of anything, and that's sort of quite freeing. I can do whatever I want, but at the same time, how do I know if I'm doing it right or not?
Absolutely.
Do you ever have that sort of feeling?
Well, except I think that a lot of poetry, it has that potential to have structures and freedom within the structures. So a lot of poets, for example, will still write sonnets, a classic 14-line poem that came about as, well, it's from the Italian for little song. You're meant to be able to encapsulate something just in 14 lines with various rhyme schemes, often a rhyming couplet at the end of it that sums up whatever you were talking about in the previous 12 lines. And the discipline of having to do that and having to marshal what might be your massive thoughts about something into this little form and try and condense it and compress it so that it's kind of, you know, it's diluted orange squash rather than the whole jug of orange that you're sharing round. Oh, that was a nice simile, wasn't it? It's almost like I'm a poet. Anyway, the discipline to do that is available to you in poetry, actually. So although I do write kind of free verse, at the same time, yeah, I like a sonnet or a triolet or a haiku, even the 17-syllable form of which John Cooper Clarke's famous haiku, to sum up a subject in 17 syllables is very difficult. See what he did there. Anyway, yeah, it's both structure and freedom, I think.
I guess so, yeah.
Who first inspired you? You know, you mentioned your little poem about the fly. Where would that have come from? Would that have been from stuff you've read at school, or did you read poetry at home, or what sort of got you going in the first place?
Yeah, so there was poetry around at school and a little bit at home. So my mum, although she definitely didn't say that she ever used to write poetry herself. But it turned out, long story short, but when I found my biological father, who she'd had an affair with when she was his secretary, as you do, very 70s, he said that she had written loads of poems to her dad. And actually, I found these poems after my mum died, and they were these funny, rhyming poems that she'd write him on his birthday, but she never said, like, so I'd be sat there when I was kind of between 8 and 14, just kind of doodling away, really, inspired by just loving the words, loving the poetry at school, loving daft nursery rhymes. And it was odd. It was this thing it's almost like a quirk of the brain that we shared, even though she didn't let on. And then I loved, so growing up in the 80s, on the telly, you would have people like Richard Digance, if you remember him, but he was a kind of funny folk singer type thing. And then you had Jasper Carrott, who would do songs as part of his comedy act. Funky Moped, exactly. And then a bit later on, some of the earliest stand-up that I saw, because I would always watch the BBC New Act comedy competition that would be on really late at night, like on BBC Two. And I remember Corky and the Juice Pigs. I think they were a Canadian musical act. I just loved them. Kind of a precursor to Flight of the Conchords. Kind of for me, it was always music and rhythm with comedy, which is the thing I most loved. But the thing is, I'm quite clumsy. I mean, it turns out I have an all right singing voice. It's acceptable. And had I had the discipline to, learn the ukulele or the guitar, probably I'd just have become a singing comedian, actually. But I didn't. So all I had was poems then. And then later on, I met John Hegley very early on. And there's all these funny. Do you remember? Well, I say do you remember, but he's very much around now. Murray Lachlan-Young, who was the £1 million poet, so called because in the mid-90s he got a record deal for £1 million for his funny performance poems. And he dressed a bit like Byron the poet and popped up in classic 90s films like About a Boy. Anyway, he's now on the circuit that I'm on now. But at that time, he was this kind of press phenomenon. And I was just like, look, it's the thing. You can do comic. Oh, and Pam Ayres. Although I didn't identify with Pam Ayres, even though, of course, Pam Ayres is who I most got compared to when I started out, because I was, a woman doing funny poems with a regional accent. All that was around me. And then eventually I then read more miserable poets, like Leonard Cohen and Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes, and kind of subtly and much later developed the kind of other side to my poetry, as we've already established, the worse and less fun side of my poetry.
Have you ever had anyone being like snobbish towards the kind of poetry that you do? Have you ever had any sort of, I don't know, do people sort of, I don't know whether you're on Twitter or anything like that, are people funny about, dividing up poetry? Like there's, there are certain people who shouldn't be poets because they're not taking it seriously enough. Or have you ever come up against that?
Yeah.
It's not worthy enough.
Really?
Definitely. And actually, it's kind of, I suppose it's a bit more subtle than people on Twitter going, you shouldn't be a poet, you're not posh enough. It genuinely is more subtle. But actually, it's that, so those of us who do performance poetry, particularly those of us who are funny, generally there are certain types of gigs we will get offered and certain types of publication opportunities, which for a long time was no publication opportunities. Actually, no one published funny performance poets. And I think we were just kind of aware of it. And then a few of us, so Murray Lachlan-Young and Matt Harvey and Luke Wright, we got offered jobs on this Radio 4 show called Saturday Live, where we wrote basically topical, funny rhyming poems throughout the show. And that did attract some snot. There's a particular radio critic who would just, whenever she mentioned Saturday Live, she'd be like, and the awful poets. Less subtle than someone on Twitter. But so in a way, it was like we knew our place, but our place seemed pretty all right, because at that time, like in the, the late, mid, 2010s, we were getting gigs, like I was poet in residence for the Glastonbury Festival, I was poet in residence for the Great North Run. So it felt like whatever you didn't get in terms of publication or kudos or the Poetry Society taking any notice of you, at least you were getting interesting, fun gigs. But now...
I was going to ask you, what does that involve, like being a poet in residence for an organisation?
Yeah, it depends on what the organisation wants, but often they just they want to wheel you out at their press conferences so they can go, look, we do fun things.
Look, we have a poet.
We're cultured, but we're not.
She's a poet.
We're not cultured.
Say something, poet. She'll read a poem in a minute.
Exactly.
There, she's done one.
That's basically
How
it.
cool are we? Look how left-wing and cool we are.
Exactly. Sometimes they do actually lead to slightly more, like
I love the fact that you're so cool with that as well, Kate. That's so wonderful.
That's
that
fine.
Speaks so volumes about you that you're like, oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah,
I know.
I get it.
Exactly. I do get it.
No offense.
As long as they pay me. As long as it's very interesting. But then, sometimes there is a nicer thing, like an ongoing relationship, like actually the Great North Run. So I was poet in residence for them in 2011, and I think for them it was also a bit of a, look, we're cool, we've got a poetry residence. But they in the end, I kind of got really into running, and I did a family show about running, which they supported the next year, and now it's their 40th anniversary, and they've kind of come back to me and got me to do a poem about COVID and the run, because they're doing a documentary about these 40 years. And then the run people have kind of picked that up and gone, oh, hang on, that genuinely does encapsulate what we were hoping to say around this year's run, which is still taking place, but a bit against the odds. And they've pulled me back in again. And actually, that is really nice, because that feels like that's genuinely come out of because of the poetry that I wrote, if you know what I mean. And they've gone, flipping heck, yes, this is what we wanted to say. And it's a bit of a...
You've properly touched them.
Yeah.
Like you've probably properly got inside the head with it. And it's actually chimed.
It's chimed. And that's probably because of the existing relationship and the fact I did do that run, and I did think about all the people doing the run, 10 years ago, and it's still being in my head. So there's something a bit more... I mean, that if you could have that more often as a poet for hire, where you are, I suppose I have it with the Verb as well on Radio 3, where I know what the values of that programme are, and I can tune into them, and I know what they want from me as well. I am their light relief, but with a touch of cleverness, I suppose, thrown in. And that's, that's okay. That's easier. I think because a lot of the writers that you talk to, a lot of the writing you're talking about is people setting off on a blank page into the dark, writing a book project, or other long form project, not knowing where it's going to go.
Yeah.
And actually, I think that is so much braver than what I do, which is having these shorter term things, which often get feedback and are often commissions. So yeah, I don't know if I would have the courage to just throw something out there and hope that it landed. I couldn't. I don't think.
What I'm hearing then, to break it down, to sort of analyse what we've said there, what you're basically saying is that poetry is quite easy, and you can kind of get away with murder if you want and get paid for it. But that's cool.
Kind of. Yeah.
Is that yeah?
Yeah. Although it turns out,
as long as you're actually very good at it. There's a little caveat at the end. You do actually need to be good at it.
Bloody hell.
Yeah.
It's always that bit, isn't it?
You've always got to be good at stuff to succeed. Jesus
all those
Christ.
boxes are getting ticked, and then all of a sudden, but you've got to be talented.
I can see Dave was like on the edge of his seat there. He was about to punch the air, and then suddenly, mate.
I just heard the words easy, paid, doesn't even have to rhyme. I'm like, what? Hang on. Got to be good.
Got this. Yeah, it does have to be good. Damn.
When I write a poem, I don't know where I'm going. I just start, words are flowing from me head, squiggity plop. Sometimes they're immortal, sometimes they sound awful, but mostly I just sort of lose the thread.
So what are your next projects, Kate? What's on the horizon?
Ooh, okay. So well, two big things. One doesn't seem to have been officially announced, but I think if I say it's here, it's all right.
Oh my God, we've got an exclusive, boys!
What?
Carry on, Kate. Do
I
it.
think we need a fanfare.
So what's the big announcement,
Go on,
Kate? Thank you for coming on. What is the big announcement?
So the big announcement is that my show, Where There's Muck, There's Bras, which was my show about northern women, ones you might have forgotten, ones you might have heard of, ones you might never have heard of, from Helen Sharman to Betty Boothroyd to Hilda of Whitby. That show, a publisher. So I'm only going through properly with this announcement. If I say I'm going to be vague. I'm going to be vague and tantalising.
Like that, yeah.
I'm going to say a major national publisher, which newly has a base in Manchester, which is unusual and interesting. This major national publisher approached me in the autumn and said, "Oh, you've probably had lots of publishers ask you about your show about northern women." And I was like, yes, lots of publishers, fending them off with a big stick, brackets, no other publishers at all, obviously none. But they were like, yes. Anyway, so if there's any chance you would write a book of the show, we'd be very interested. And I was like, yes.
Brilliant.
Lockdown project, and also national publication at
Fabulous.
last, which I think I had always wanted but not known how to get. So I wrote that book between January and March, and I think it's coming out, all being well. I don't know, timetables might have gone weird, but I think early next year.
Brilliant.
February next year. And I also wrote a play about imagining a meeting between Bernard Manning the comedian and Ted Hughes the poet. And as you do. And the Ted Hughes Festival has commissioned that, and we are going to rehearse it in September this year. COVID regulations.
And who are you going to play, Ted or Bern?
I don't think she needs to answer that, do you?
Well, neither. But I'll tell you what, Ted and Bernard are not played by men. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, excellent.
Exciting. Yeah. So, but neither of those things. So neither of those things are being a stand-up poet thing.
No,
that's fantastic. Okay.
Totally. Very exciting.
Looking forward to the Bernard Manning Ted Hughes one.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm not saying my thought fox is fat, but.
That is the best encapsulation of the piece.
You can use that if you want. Use that. Have that as your.
Can I have that?
Yeah, have that as your log line.
Can I have that? Because that's like better than anything I've written. It is.
And where would we be able to see that?
Well, we're gonna there's a venue called Cast in Doncaster, and we are doing a thing where we'll go for a week to their rehearsal studio, and so me, 2 actors and a director are going to work for a week and then share something at the end of that week, and it'll be on Zoom streamed as well as in person, and then hopefully we will tour it. So of course, as you can imagine, all this sort of stuff's a bit vague and up in the air at the minute, isn't it? But somehow, somewhere, it will happen. Get out there. And it was just a mad idea that I had and was very enthusiastic about. And I was very enthusiastic about it to the right person in the right place at the right time, because it was a producer of the Ted Hughes Festival after he'd just come out of my show. And I was like, oh, blah, blah, blah. I had this idea. Imagine if Ted Hughes and Bernard Manning had met, because they could have met, And I went off on a big monologue. And instead of backing away, like gingerly and pretending not to have seen me, he actually went, flipping heck, that sounds interesting. We'll get some Arts Council money and you can do that. And I was like, whoa, how can that be allowed, that the mad thoughts of my mind can turn into a thing?
So, Kate, you must have a website that people can, presumably you've got a newsletter or something that people can sign up to find out?
Oh, I haven't got a no. Well, yeah. I should have a newsletter. I can't do that. It's a good job, isn't it? Because the last 15 months would have been, I'm feeling a bit existentially traumatised by my occupation today. Any thoughts on that, newsletter people? But my website's katefox.co.uk. I'm quite active on Twitter @KateFoxWriter. And I'm sort of active on Instagram, but all I do on Instagram is post pictures of places where I've been swimming and
that
with dinner.
That is basically Instagram, isn't it? I think dinner and places people have been swimming.
Kate, we've got a massive favour to ask you.
Go on.
We were planning to write a poem for Ilkley Literature Festival, do like a little poetry competition.
Yes.
And we thought we might enter that as a little task. We were going to ask you, if you could give us some pointers how we can win this poetry competition, because we want to win it. We don't want to just enter it.
Oh, sorry,
we
no.
want to win it.
What I was going to ask you, Kate, is could you just write mine for me? You don't tell me. Then we'll just enter it. Is that all right?
So
carry on giving the tips to the other two. Yeah, go on. What do you two want to know?
So that's part A of the favour. Yeah. I'm afraid it's got a part B as well. Part B is that would you possibly come back and judge them?
Oh, I love that.
For us.
Yes, I totally will.
Let's get
and actually,
judged.
I'll tell you what,
That'd be lovely.
Yes. I'll do the tips. I'll do the judging. And I'll tell you what, though. Do you want the tips now? Or is that a separate thing?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Tips now. Okay. Well, actually, do you know who the judges of the poetry competition are? Because that will depend on what my tips
bribery.
are.
I like what you're thinking. Yeah. So
I don't. Shall I have a quick look and see if
have a quick
available?
Look because because poetry competition. I'm assuming it's kind of page poetry, and they're wanting something more like my Sea Swimmers poem rather than my I wish they'd fucking drown breaststrokers poem.
I hope not.
I'm guessing.
Possibly. It just says judging will be fair and unbiased.
That sounds like the lady doth protest too much. That why doesn't you shouldn't have to say your judges would be unbiased.
It's true.
That should go without saying. Something's gone on there, hasn't it?
Poetry world is a very small world.
Murky underworld of poetry.
We definitely won't pick somebody that we're related to.
Well, basically, give it to me daughter.
No, that does happen.
Ooh, there is a bit here. Sorry, just let me read you this bit because that might give you a steer. Last year's winning poets were praised for their powerful imagery, disciplined use of form and language. Well, that sounds quite serious, doesn't it? Emotional subject matter, and for demonstrating the magic that poetry can do. And it has to respond to the theme of the return.
The return.
So,
all right. Well, now that's good that you've got a theme. That's half the battle then. So okay. So, my top tips would be, so think of something that genuinely either really excites you, really makes you happy, really angers you, or really saddens you. Like, so not just something you're ambivalent about. If you were writing about a vegetable and you just quite like asparagus, don't write about asparagus. Whereas if you love broccoli or hate broccoli with a passion, choose the broccoli, not the asparagus. That's a metaphor, but also
I tell you what, I wish the theme was mushrooms now, because that's inspired me.
Well, mushrooms don't they sort of disappear and return? The return of all nature and fungi, maybe.
They do.
You're straight in there, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
The return of the mushrooms. Another tip would be so that's kind of like from your personal writing perspective where you've got to be with it. So strength of thing. And then when it comes to writing it, do you know, well, I'm going to give you a tip as to the process. What I would do, what a lot of poetry workshops I attend do, and when I run poetry workshops, I get people to do this. Just basically set a timer for 5 minutes and get the theme or a word in your head and just write. Don't censor yourself, don't stop yourself, see what happens. Once you've done that free writing exercise, you probably have something that you could turn and prune and sculpt into a poem. And then my final tip, probably, because otherwise it's like 101 to writing poems. That will take too long and lives are short. So you, like any piece of writing, the rule about the first line grabbing you, that works even more in poetry though. So the first line needs to do something interesting and arresting. Generally, so often in a poetry workshop, the biggest advice given is cut the first 2 lines. Your first line is actually here. The first line is usually buried deeper within your writing. Do you know what I mean? I think that's the same with other fiction novels.
I think so, yeah.
And then next tip, don't worry about form too much. Don't worry if it comes out rhyming or if it doesn't. Just let it do what it needs to do. I know that's a bit vague, but that's something about trusting your own voice. I was going to say something about the last line, but I've forgotten. Don't worry too much about making it end on a pat note. In the end, it was all a dream, or at the end. Don't worry about ending in the middle. End in such a way that intrigues us, maybe.
Okay.
I think so. Oh, and of course, have you talked about this before as a writing tip? It goes like times 10 for poetry. Generally, show, not tell. So kind of don't tell us that there's a famous Chekhov quote about this that I'm going to now render really badly, but he says something like, don't tell us that the moon is shining, show us the glint of moonlight on the glistening grass, or whatever, which doesn't mean you have to overdo it with the flowery adjectives either, but it does mean allow us to see it, taste it, feel it, hear it, smell it, type thing. Job's a good one.
Brilliant. All right, winners. 3 winners coming up.
Can't see how that's bronze, silver and gold. Nailed now, isn't it?
Are you just saying that, Dave, because you've taken those tips far too literally and you're just about finished on your mushroom poem that's glistening in the moonlight?
I'm done. Yep.
What happens, if during that initial 5 minutes that you just go for it, what you end up with is just a blank page?
Well, I suppose that's technically shouldn't happen, because an exercise again that I always do to start a workshop off is a free write. So we don't even have a theme. I set the timer for 3 minutes and say, right, Now, let whatever comes in your head out. Doesn't matter if it's rubbish. Doesn't matter if it's scary and would get you arrested. No one's going to read it. Just don't stop. Don't take your pen off that paper for 3 minutes. And it's really hard then to end up with a blank page. If you've got a blank page, you've probably got some quite fundamental block to your whole process.
Do you have some sort of punishment for people who don't write anything?
I should have. Maybe that would make people write better, wouldn't it? Or not? In the nurturing spirit of a poetry writing session, some sort of electrocution wouldn't work. But actually, now you've mentioned it, yeah.
Or maybe read them some Vogon poetry.
Exactly.
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah, that would be a perfect punishment. Yes, less severe than electrocution, and maybe actually inspiring in the end, potentially.
Do you know, I was just going to ask about. Talking about your poetry workshops. I read something yesterday that suggested that this links back to a previous guest we've had, but that Sarah Millican was on one of your poetry workshops, and you encouraged her to get into stand-up. Did I read that right?
Basically how she started in stand-up was it was the first workshop I ever ran as well, and it was an open workshop. It was open to poets, comedians, playwrights, anybody who wanted to perform their own words. And and it was at the Caedmon Hall in Gateshead, and the idea was we'd have a full day workshop run by me and a bloke called Carl Thompson, who had lots of experience of running performance workshops. And at the end of the day, in the evening, we would have a performance. So because I knew there was a huge value to go in straight from. It's just one thing to say, I'm going to practice performing, but you can't really practice unless you've got an audience, not really. So it was quite a high pressure thing. And Sarah rang me up before it and kind of was asking questions about it. And she was saying that she worked at the job centre and she'd written stuff for the live theatre and she wanted to get her plays on, but she'd sometimes seen actors read her work and thought, hang on, I want it to be like this. So she thought she should try perform herself. And I was going, brilliant. And she came along and had written this 5-minute, what she called a monologue. Yeah. And I said to her after, that's stand-up comedy. And it's really good because it was so brilliantly, sharply written. She was not, at that point, a good performer. She was like anybody who first starts out as a stand-up, kind of yet to find their voice. And she said, will you mentor me? And I genuinely, at that point, thought, I honestly, it makes it sound like I'm going, I was Mystic Meg. But I could tell that she was potentially a much better stand-up than I would ever be. She was like the stand-up maybe that I would have wanted to be. And so I kind of just pushed her in the right direction of various kind of gigs and open mics and stuff, and we stayed in touch. And she came to a poetry workshop actually that John Hegley ran very early on, and he was very nice to her, and he made a real impression on her actually, and she just loved that whole. It's a very friendly scene, the poetry scene. It's as is the open mic comedy scene, but there's something particularly nurturing about poets, and it was quite a good place as one of the places where she started off. So yes, I always feel like it's a bit of a, I'm not going to say claim to fame exactly, but I kind of, for me, it's proof that the idea that you were just born being a stand-up in the right place and at the right time, well, that's clearly bollocks. You have to find the context in which you can become a stand-up type of thing. And she did in the Northeast in the early 2000s.
Quite a good endorsement of your workshops as well, really, isn't it?
Well, I think she would have succeeded anyway, and I think that, and it taught me, I think, and confirmed to me, there's a heck of a lot of people out there who are potentially, one of the best stand-ups ever, or one of the best novelists ever, or one of the best singer-songwriters ever, who just need the right call
and encouragement,
that speaks to them, who just need that invitation. The encouragement, exactly. It's encouragement, isn't it? Permission almost as well. Permission to, yes, we want to hear your words. Yes, we want someone will hear them if you share them. And I just think, for me, that's one of the most powerful things, actually. And that's just why I love still doing workshops, in schools, community groups, wherever. There's always people
it's an uplifting message, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly, definitely.
Well, Kate, thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful to talk to you.
Yeah,
really has.
Fabulous.
Really good fun.
Yes.
And,
well, thank you very much,
just
chaps.
brilliant. Thank you so much.
We've all learnt a lot.
Would you read us one more before you go?
Oh, thought, yes, I'll tell you what, how's this for a theme? So your theme that you've got to write on is return, isn't it? And this poem is called Returns, and it's about how during the pandemic I basically for quite a while couldn't read. I know, like a lot of people, my concentration just absolutely went, and I hated it because I love reading, and so I was just desperately looking forward nonetheless to returning to a bookshop. So nice. This is that. Okay, Returns. The plague books won't be in yet, but the dystopia section will be well stocked, and you'd usually want 2 meters of space to browse anyway. This last shop I came to on purpose, a pilgrimage. Then the assistant said they still had customers. Her son had been sent home for coughing in PE. So there's where I'll return first. Enjoy the full shelves, calming lines, the glossy wooden lectern, the smell of new, the rash of wood-cut covers in striking monochromes, the imprints from London, Chicago, New York. I spent £50 I no longer had last time. We'll spend another 50 next. Feeling I'm preserving an ecology, a sort of home. So happy for this normality, my eyes will fill so the titles are blurred. But reading, no, can hardly take in a word.
Love that.
I was just thinking about stealing that poem for the Ugly Festival, to be honest. Seems to fit quite well. Totally.
I was going to ask, is that a well-known poem? Will people recognise that? Or
has that been published anywhere? Just curious. No.
It sadly has, but maybe like if you changed every other word, or if you change the word return, although it kind of needs to be about return.
Yeah, that's
kind of the worst idea you've ever had. You've been given some really good top tips, Kate, but that is a pretty poor tip for a poetry competition about where the theme is return. No, thank you so much for your time, Kate. It's been absolutely lovely to speak to you after all these years.
It's been a pleasure.
And
thank you.
I'm so glad you've an unfailing writer in so many different ways.
Thank you. I feel affirmed. I will still be asking myself as I go for my next swim, am I a failing writer? What is failing? What is unfailing? But that's all right. It's all part of being a writer. So thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Kate. Take care.
Kate.
Cheers, Kate.
Enjoy the swim.
Oh, I will. Always.
Yeah, take care.
Don't fucking drown.
Won't drown. And I won't drown anyone else, I promise.
Why would you even need to say that, you psycho? Oh my God. Now if someone accidentally drowns while you're going for your swim, this is recorded and you're like number one suspect. Exactly. You shouldn't say that when you're being recorded.
To my poem and go, it was her.
Oh, man.
Exactly.
Lovely.
I told you it was good, didn't I?
Yeah. You did say that, Tom,
and
you were right.
It was actually better than I thought it was, and I was there at the time.
Yeah.
Which is weird.
Better than I ever remembered.
No, what a lovely, lovely lady
yes.
Kate is. And fantastic poet and just fun and funny.
And how about that, having the actual poem that we can now copy? And
I mean, that's magic, that, isn't it? We'll have to change a few words each, so they're all the same.
Yeah.
But if we send something roughly in the same, we should be all right.
Totally. I tell you what, if we don't win now, we'll only have ourselves to blame, won't we?
No, we can blame Kate, can't we?
Well, yeah, we can blame the judges and Kate and the rules and everything else. But somewhere in there, we also have to blame ourselves, yeah. So let's get on with writing poetry, lads. Yeah. But also, let's not forget that next week is the reveal of our flash fiction horror challenge.
Yes.
How's it all going? How are we getting on with that?
Well, but just a few bits to tidy up on it, obviously.
I haven't started.
Yeah.
I've not started yet.
Blooming heck.
I'm going to just confess.
I'm still a bit overwhelmed by the whole horror thing. I'm not really. It just doesn't. I don't know. Can't find a way into it.
I used to be really into horror. I used to watch loads of horror films, and then we had a baby, and I just can't seem to watch horror films in the same way anymore.
Because nothing's as bad. It just doesn't touch you as much as the horror
exactly,
of having a child.
Yeah. This isn't scary.
Try getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning for a feed.
Exactly. So this is going to be a challenge.
Yeah. Gainty and I, a few years ago, we really enjoyed Blair Witch Project a few years ago. Went to see it at the cinema, and we're freaking terrified by it, but we loved it. And then quite a few years later, we thought, it's on tonight. It's on telly. Shall we? Let's pull up a sofa and we'll watch it. And it got, I reckon, about 25 minutes in, and
I yawned. I was a bit tired.
Katie was like, yeah, I'm a bit tired as well. Should we go to bed? Yeah, let's go to bed. And that was it.
Is that because you were scared or bored?
Actually scared.
Right,
no,
okay.
Genuinely scared.
Because I remember watching that when it came out in the cinema with my now wife. And we came out. You know, you kind of discussed the film when you come out. I don't know if you remember the end of Blair Witch in like that basement type thing. And the guy stood in the corner. So we're sort of discussing the film, what have you. And Helena says, oh, right, yeah. No, I thought he was having a wee. Because he just like stood facing in the corner.
I wasn't scared at all.
Yeah, why is that? It's just having a wee.
See, I remember that bit because I used to hang my dressing gown on the back of the door in a student house where I lived, and I remember watching the film and being a bit scared, and then that night I woke up and I could just see the outline of my dressing gown facing the wall in the corner, and I properly pooed my pants.
All right, I'm glad we had this little chat. I've had a really good idea for a horror story now.
And there we go. See? Inspiration.
The dressing gown.
So yeah, let's get ready for next week.
Okay.
A big reveal. Remember, 500 words max. Tom, I know you've got a problem with keeping things down.
Me,
so
see you next week, chaps. And let's scare the pants off each other.
yes. Laters.
Wait.
What?
Wait. We forgot to mention. We need to mention that we're doing a live event again. I know we've mentioned it already, but it's worth mentioning again because it's going to be such a huge and extraordinary event.
It's just a massive opportunity for people to come and see Dave's catchphrase live, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
yes.
exactly.
I'll just repeat it for half an hour.
Come and hang out with the stars of this show.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's on the 5th of August. It's Thursday, the 5th of August. It's at 6:30, and it's at Ilkley Manor House Courtyard.
But how can people get...
It's completely free.
It is free, but tickets are available.
They are available.
And you can find out all the details at failingwriterspodcast.com/blog.
But I would get on it quickly because I don't know how much longer they're going to be available. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. If you've ever seen a hotcake sale, bit like that.
At least 3 have already gone.
We don't need tickets, mate.
Just saying.
Because we're doing it, we won't need tickets. So you can probably just... Yeah, you don't need to book them.
Good point.
Yeah.
Damn.
Do we get a lanyard? Do we get like a backstage lanyard?
I mean, have they sent a message about what we get in the green room and stuff yet, about our rider or not? Because...
I guess if Tom gets red M&Ms in that bowl, get ready. That's all I'm saying.
That'll be a rage.
It's going to be fun though, isn't it?
It is going to be fun.
Yeah, be fun for somebody.
Yeah. So, come join us. It'll be a laugh.
Yep.
And
Thursday, August 5th, Ilkley.
Yeah. And
Get
hey,
on it.
even if it isn't a laugh, it's only 45 minutes. So, you know what I mean? You haven't lost much.
Exactly, yeah. We should say there are other acts on after us in case.
No, there's some music afterwards, and I think there's like a little mini play as well, isn't there?
Yeah.
Come along,
indeed. Excellent. All right, so you can say goodbye now again.
Are you actually going to let us go this time?
Right.
I'm going to let you go. Go about your business.
Bye.
Bye. Blah, 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 whatever. Hello?
Hello?
Where's everybody gone?